Travels. Returning to the guest house, Kanai found that Moina had left him his lunch in a tiffin carrier. The meal was simple: plain rice, masurar dal, a quick cooked chorchorti of potatoes, fish bones, and a kind of green leaf he could not identify. Finally, there was a watery jowl of a tiny but toothsome fish called morola. Even cold, the food was delicious. Kanai's cook was from Lucknow, and his table at home in New Delhi tended to be set with elaborate Mughlai dishes. It was a long time since Kanai had eaten simple Bengali food, and the taste seemed to explode in his head. At the end of the meal, he was giddily replete. After he had put away the utensils, Kanai made his way up the stairs to Nirmal's study. Shutting the door behind him, he pulled a chair up to the desk and flipped open the notebook. You, Kanai, were among the last to see Kusum in Lusibari in 1970. That year, on the evening of the performance of the Bonbibi Jahoranama, she vanished as if into the eye of a storm. No one knew where she went. No trace of her remained. That was the last we heard of Kusum, and to be truthful, we paid little mind to her fate. Sadly, it is all too common in these parts for young people and children to disappear into the city. There are so many such that one loses track of them. The years went by and the time of my retirement approached. I would be lying if I did not admit that the prospect filled my heart with trepidation. I had been headmaster for close to 30 years. The school, my pupils, my teaching, these things had become my life. Without the pattern and order of a classroom routine, what would become of me? I remembered my days of disorder when the world looked so irredeemably confused that to lie abed seemed the best possible course. Would this condition beset me again? You can imagine my despondency. The true tragedy of a routine spent life is that its wastefulness does not become apparent till it's too late. For years I had been telling Nilma that I'd be writing up in my study. She was glad for me. She took no pleasure in the fact that she enjoyed so much esteem in the world and I so little. She wanted me to be known for what she believed me to be, a writer, a poet. But the truth was that I had not written a single word in all my time in Lusibari. Not just that, I had even abandoned my other great pleasure, reading. Regret and remorse attacked me on all these counts as the day of my superannuation neared. One day I went to Calcutta and scoured my favorite stalls and bookshops, only to realize that I could no longer afford to buy books. I returned to Lisibari with the only new volume in my possession, the copy of Barnier's Travels that you were so kind as to buy for me. As my final day in school drew nigh, it became increasingly apparent that the other masters were keenly awaiting my departure. Not, I think, out of spirit of malice, but merely from an eagerness to see what the future might hold. Someone who has stayed in the same job for 30 years becomes like mildew on the wall. Everybody longs to see it wither in the bright light of a new day. As word of my impending retirement spread, I began to receive invitations to visit schools in the islands. In the past, perhaps I would have declined, but I now recall the poet's dictum: to stay is to be nowhere. And I was happy to accept. One such invitation was from an old acquaintance who lived in Kumirmari, which is a good distance from here. To get to it requires several changes of ferry. I decided to go. The morning came, and it so happened that Nilima was away, making one of her trips on behalf of the trust. Left to my own devices, I spent too much time packing the jola I had planned to take with me. I put in one book and then another. The journey was not a short one, after all, and I would need plenty to read. In the process, I misjudged many things: the timing of the ferries, how long it would take to get to the jetty, and so on. Suffice it to say that I missed the first connection, which meant that I would miss all the rest. I was sitting in despair on the bard when suddenly I spotted a familiar figure going by in a boat. I had not seen Horen Naskar for many years, but I recognized at once his squat build and narrow eyes. There was a teenage boy with him, and I knew this must be his oldest son. I hurried down the embankment and accosted them. Horen! Horen! Wait! When I drew level with them, he said in amazement, Sar, you're here? I was bringing my son to see you. He wants to enroll in your school. I put a hand on the boy's shoulder. I'll make sure he gets in. But in return, there's something you must do for me. Yes, sir. What is it? Horen, I have to go to Kumirmari. Can you take me? Why, sir, yes. For you, anything. Get in. He gave his son a pat on the shoulder and told him to find his own way home. Then, without a backward glance, we set off in the direction of Kumirmari. Once we were on the water, it struck me that it was a long time since I had sat in a nuko like Horen's. In recent years, when I felt the need to travel outside Lusibari, and this happened seldom enough, I generally took ferries and boat-boaties. Sitting in the boat, the familiar scenery began to take on a different aspect. It was as if I were seeing it in a new way. Under the shade of my umbrella, I opened one of the books I had brought with me, my copy of Bernier's Travels. And as if by magic, the pages fell open to his account of his travels in the Tide country. Presently, Horen said, Sir, what is it that you are reading? Are there any stories in it? Why not tell me too, since we have such a long way to go? All right then, I said. Listen. This book was by a Christian priest, I told him, a Frenchman who'd come to India in the year 1665. At that time, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's memory was still fresh in our villages, and Emperor Aurangzeb was sitting on the Mughal throne. The priest's name was Francois Bernier, and he was of the Jesuit Champraday. He had with him 2 Portuguese pilots, as well as a considerable company of servants. On their first day among the mangroves, they found themselves beset with hunger. Although they had food, they were nervous about going ashore to cook it. They had heard many stories of the ferocity of the local tigers, and they wanted to take every possible precaution. Late in the day, a suitable sandbank was found, and 2 chickens and a fish were prepared. After consuming this meal, the Jesuit and his party set off again and rowed until dark. When night approached, they took their boat into a snug creek and anchored it at a distance from the shore, where they judged themselves to be safe from predators. But they took the additional precaution of maintaining a watch through the night, and this proved lucky for the priest. When his turn came, he was privileged to witness a truly amazing spectacle, a rainbow made by the moon. Oh! cried Horen. I know where this happened. They must have been at Garafotola. Rubbish, Horen, I said. How could you know such a thing? This happened over 300 years ago. But I have seen it too, Horen protested. And it's exactly as you describe it. A creek just off a big river. That's the only place where you can see the moon's rainbow. It happens when there's a full moon and a fog. But never mind all that, sir. Go on with the story. On the 3rd day, Bernier and his party discovered that they were lost. They wandered through creeks and rivers and became more and more distracted, thinking that they were trapped forever in this labyrinth of waterways. And then again an amazing thing happened. They saw some people in the distance working on a sandbank, so they headed in that direction. These would be local fishermen, they assumed, who would show them the way. But on getting there, they discovered that these men were Portuguese. They were making salt. Ah, said Horen with a long drawn-out sigh. I know that place. It's on the way to Kedokali. There's a place there where people still sometimes go to make salt. My Chotokaka spent the night there once, and all night long he heard strange voices uttering strange words. It must have been those same ghosts they saw. But never mind all that, sir. Just go on. The fourth day found the priest and his party still in the tide country, and in the evening they withdrew once again off into the shelter of a creek. Then there followed a most extraordinary night. First, the wind died down so that not a leaf stirred in the forest. Next, the air around the boat began to heat up, and it soon became so hot that the priest and his party could scarcely breathe. Then all of a sudden the mangroves around the boat seemed to burst into flame as the greenery was invaded by great swarms of glowworms. These insects hovered in such a way as to give the impression that fires were dancing in the mangrove's roots and branches. This caused panic among the sailors who, the Jesuit says, did not doubt that there were so many devils. "But Tsar," said Horen, with a puzzled look in my direction, "why should they doubt it? What else could they be?" "I don't know, Horen. I'm just telling you what the priest says." "Go on, Tsar." "Go on." "The night that followed was still worse, altogether dreadful and perilous," says the priest. "With no warning, a violent storm arose and pursued the priest and his party into a creek. They took their boat close to the shore, and using all their ropes tied it to a tree. But the storm raged with such ferocity that their cables could not long withstand the wind. Soon the ropes snapped, and it seemed certain the boat would be blown out of its shelter into a storm-tossed Mahona, where the waves were sure to rip apart the hull. All the while the rain fell as if it poured into the boat from buckets, and the lightning and thunder were so vivid and loud and so near our heads that we despaired of surviving this horrible night." At this juncture, in a sudden and spontaneous movement, the priest and his two Portuguese pilots took hold of a tree and entwined their arms into the mangroves, twisted stilts. Their arms became living roots, like those of the tree that had given them shelter. In this way they clung on for the space of 2 hours while the tempest raged with unabated force. "Ire!" cried Horen. "They must have crossed the line." "What line, Horen?" "Didn't you say they were lost, sir?" "Yes, I did." "That's what happened then. They crossed the line by mistake and ended up on one of Dokinrai's islands. Whenever you have a storm like that, one that appears so suddenly out of nowhere, you know it's the doing of Dokinrai and his demons." I grew impatient and said, "Horen, a storm is an atmospheric disturbance. It is neither intention nor motive." I had spoken so sharply that he would not disagree with me, although he could not bring himself to agree either. "As to that, sir," he said, "let us leave each other to our beliefs and see what the future holds." Here was a man, I thought, whom the poet would have recognized, filled with muscle and simplicity. I have gone on at too great a length. Hours have passed. The ink in my ballpoint is running down. This is what happens when you have not written for years. Every moment takes on a startling clarity. Small things become the world in microcosm. Kusum and Horen have left me here with Fokir. They have gone to find out if the rumors are true, if Morichapi is soon to be attacked, and if so, when the assault will come. To think of all the years when I had nothing but time and yet wrote not one word. And now, like some misplaced, misgendered Scheherazade, I am trying to stave the night off with a flying, fleeting pen.